On March 7th, 50 years ago, thousands of brave souls marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge outside Selma, Alabama, on their way to Montgomery to fight for the rights of all Americans to vote. Police beat them back with billy clubs and tear gas, and the tragedy became known as Bloody Sunday. Who would have guessed on that day, 50 years later, the march would be led by the first African American to hold the office of president? Progress, yes? Maybe? No? I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Join me as the Another View Roundtable talks about race relations after Selma, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Just want to give a shout out to everybody who's in town for the MEAC conference this week that's been going on. And if I'm not mistaken, Norfolk State is still in the running. Is that correct?
They'll be playing Hampton tonight.
They'll be playing Hampton tonight.
Yes.
Norfolk State and Hampton. So there we go. Battle of the Bay again.
Is it in the scope?
It's at the scope. Yes, it's at the scope. And one quick message for you all. If you parents, if you have a son or a daughter who's been falling behind in high school or struggling to keep up, there's a free program right here in Hampton Roads that can help. It's called the Virginia Challenge, the Commonwealth Challenge Youth Academy, and they're starting a new class on Tuesday, March the 24th. So if you want to find out more information about this project and this program, visit their website, which is vachallenge.org today. It is free. It is designed to provide 16 to 18-year-olds the values, skills, education, and self-discipline they need to become responsible adults. So that is vachallenge.org. A week ago tomorrow, we watched as President Barack Obama led the commemorative march across the Pettus Bridge, marking the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. For many, it was bittersweet, especially when you juxtapose recent current events that remind all of us that we have a long way to go in terms of race relations. Our roundtable is going to talk about this today, but it's not just looking back and lamenting, but looking at today and tomorrow and giving real suggestions on how we can make things better. Let me introduce you to our roundtable. Roger Chesley is a columnist for the Virginian Pilot, and you can read his columns every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Hey, Roger.
Hello, Barbara. Glad you still have me here every month.
Absolutely. We appreciate you being here every month. Carol Pretlow is a political science professor at Norfolk State University. How you doing, Carol?
Oh, wonderful. Behold the green and gold.
Oh, here we go. Bill Thomas is our community activist and all-around good guy. Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for joining us today. Guest pundit Tim Siebels joins us today. Tim is a professor at Old Dominion University. He's a poet and author, and his last collection of poems called Fast Animal was a National Book Award finalist. There you go. Hi, Tim. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. Will Levis, who's normally with us, is flying somewhere today, so he's in the air.
Safe travels, Will.
Absolutely.
Doing well.
And joining us by phone is Amos Jones. He's assistant professor of law at Campbell University's Law School in Raleigh, North Carolina. How you doing, Amos?
I'm great. Good afternoon, Barbara.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us, too. So now, I want to say to our audience, I really want people to listen closely to today's show, because I know when you talk about race, sometimes it can become so inflamed that people don't really hear each other. So I'm hoping that all of us will listen closely, try to understand, listen for understanding. So let's start with Ferguson, Missouri. Two police officers were shot on Wednesday night. And the Attorney General Eric Holder called the shooter or shooters a punk or punks. Police Chief Thomas Jackson resigned this week after the scathing U.S. Department of Justice report that says Ferguson police systematically deny African-American residents their civil rights. And Jackson's the third top city official to leave after this report came out. And now there are concerns that the shootings will detract from civil rights issues. Roger, I'm going to start with you. Your impressions, and particularly with the shooting of the police officers.
Well, I really don't want to focus on that. I mean, that was unfortunate what happened, and the police officers were injured in the particular incident. I do think they were singled out. It was opportunistic. But I think you really, if you have not read the report that the Justice Department put out, you would do well to do so. It's dated March 4th. I'm going to put a link to it on my Facebook page, but it's easy enough to find online. Some of the comments in the report are just astounding. How basically the people of that city, black and white, had been made more, they weren't looked at so much as people, but as a source of raking in dollars to help city government function. And, you know, it wasn't about keeping them safe. It was about how can we get money out of these folks so that we can get the city to run. Coupled with that was the sense of an attitude that black people were less than. They were singled out. You can say, well, are blacks more involved in criminality? But any rational look at the percentages of the population and what the percentages totaled in terms of arrests, in terms of fines, in terms of being patted down during certain searches, gives you no conclusion but that they were seen as to be viewed with contempt by the police department and by the city government in general, and by the court system in general.
As a matter of fact, it said 67% of Ferguson citizens are African American, yet blacks made up 85% of all vehicle stops, 93% of arrests, 88% of use of force, and 95% of all those jailed for more than 2 days.
And I don't want to put too fine a point on this in terms of the Michael Brown shooting, but you do wonder that if you've come up with the impression that the police are going to hassle us, then you're going to have contempt as well for the police department, because you have the sense that even when I'm doing right, they're going to mess with me. And so it just feeds on itself, where there's distrust between police to citizens and citizens to police.
Carol, you're shaking your head. What's up?
Yeah, we hear on the one hand from police department and from certain parts of the opposite communities that there is a lack of respect of the African American community toward them. But I'm always thinking, wait a minute, respect is a two-way street. You cannot make an assumption on people based on race. You have to do it based on what they are actually doing. And those preconceptions lead some people to accelerate activities that are non-productive.
Bill?
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
When only 6 or 7% of the black population in Ferguson votes, when you don't have spiritual and moral leadership in the community that would tell you do not do certain things, I mean, you have to look in the mirror. And I hear the Attorney General, and they're not doing anything. If you look at where only 8 and 9% of the black males in that city are graduating from high school, and 2 or 3%.
So are you saying that justifies the
no,
fact
I'm not
that
saying anything justifies anything. I'm just saying something starts someplace. I'm not out, and I know what the police are going to do. I know what the state's going to do. I know that we have issues. We talk about that all the time. Institutionalized racism. Nobody wants to talk about that. That's the problem. The problem is institutionalized racism, where you have 67% of those guys not working. They're on the streets, so they're targets. Nobody's questioning that. But once we deal with the real issues of morals and values, of dad staying at home and all that kind of stuff that people don't want to talk about, this is not going to get fixed. If 7 or 8% of the people go out to vote, you're 70% of the population, and you only have 1 or 2 elected officials, where's the problem? If you have dads running around here not taking care of their kids, and their kids out in the streets not doing what they need to do, where is the problem? We can always deal with institutionalized racism. When our elected officials don't change it, it's institutionalized racism. This toll I just came through in Portsmouth. They got a toll. You got to pay a tunnel. Poorest people in Portsmouth, which is one of the poorest communities in the Commonwealth of Virginia, have to pay that. Who's suffering? And you don't see anybody doing anything about it. So I hear you, But the song just goes on. The strain doesn't end.
Okay, well, we are going to talk about solutions as we move through the show. But Tim, I saw you shaking your head.
Oh, no. I would just say that certainly I think Bill has some points. I would also say that though the institutionalized racism feeds into it in the sense that I think you might have made this point that if black people are having a hard time to be getting employed, their options in terms of getting an income are limited, then this does not justify anyone committing crimes, but you can understand how if one is trying to eat or one is trying to feed one's children, one would do whatever is required to do that. And if the police, and this is going on as all of you know, the police have been harassing and targeting black communities as far back as I can remember, certainly in my own life, coming from Philadelphia with the Chief Frank Rizzo era. So you've always had that, and I can't help but think that if a community believes that the police department itself is corrupt, it is certainly not going to encourage them to behave respectfully or carefully with regard to the police, because you don't believe you're going to be treated fairly anyway.
Amos, I want to get some sound from you first, and then I want to play something for our audience in regard to the whole idea about police interacting with community.
The Department of Justice report is a turning point in awareness because it makes the awareness now official. No longer is this just dismissible, if you will, as a figment of folks' imaginations or an oppressed group of marginal people who don't matter, who some might try to call throwaway people, just an impulse and spasm of their anger. But now we know that it was true and that there is empirical information that backs up the charge that the criminal justice system is broken in at least Ferguson, Missouri. Okay. I wish that the microscope would come to Portsmouth and come to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and a bunch of other places out there, because it's really not just the criminal justice system that would not withstand scrutiny. It's the same judges frequently in those systems who preside over civil cases as well. And what we have is a great privileging of white narratives, white tropes, white interests, white discrimination, and that's how we get to an evisceration of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And I'm warning today, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is next. You'd be shocked at what individual judges under the cover and cloak of black robes do to black people day in and day out. And I'm talking about white-collar fathers, professors who have tenure, admissions officers at schools, the real people out there trying to address through the system, through nonviolent means, in the civil system, the same kind of discrimination that leads to killings of unarmed black people, in many cases innocent black people. The facts on Michael Brown are in dispute over whether that merchandise had been paid for or not, and as well as the Eric Garner case in Staten Island, where there was no crime. And so if you will shoot someone to death who's unarmed and innocent, then you just might demote or fire an employee from the job who's innocent as well and accept a lying narrative from the official line in their life. So it's a justice system problem that I want to call attention to that's as bad in the civil realm as it is in the criminal.
Okay. I want to play a clip, and this is kind of an example of maybe art imitating life or vice versa. But there was, if you all are familiar with the ABC hit show Scandal, last week there was an episode where a young black man was shot, and subsequently a police officer wound up planting evidence to suggest that the young man was armed. And there was a very poignant portrayal of a white police officer and his frustration with the black community. I wanted to play this for you.
You don't want to talk, that's fine. We'll use your friend Philip's testimony. This is over.
God, what the hell is it with you people?
Us people?
Yeah, you people. I didn't misspeak. You people have no idea what loyalty is, what respect is. You're here because you were supposed to help us, and you spent every second of it trying to tear us down, tear me down, push your own damn agenda.
I'm here to find the truth.
The truth is, those people in Rosemead have no respect for anything or anyone. No, they're like you. They just take whenever they want, and they have no problem turning their backs on the people who gave it to them. People like me, who strap on their boots every day, kiss their wife and kids goodbye, and trek 40 miles into a city where everyone, including little babies, are taught to look at us like the enemy. They are taught to question me, to disobey me, and still, I risk my life for these people every day for 7 years. I've allowed myself to be disrespected and hated by these people, all to protect them from themselves. I mean, all I hear about on the news are dirty cops who shoot innocent black kids. It's crap. There were 84 murders in this city last year. Were all of those cops shooting innocent black boys? Hell no. Those were blacks turning guns on each other, and yet somehow I'm the animal. Brandon Parker is dead because he didn't have respect, because those people out there who are chanting, crying over his body, they didn't teach him the right values. They didn't teach him respect. He didn't respect me. He didn't respect my badge. Questioning my authority was not his right. His blood is not on my hands.
Now, that was fiction, but I wonder how much truth might be in that. And Tim, the whole juxtaposition of blacks shooting blacks, police shooting blacks, is that a fair comparison?
Well, I think they're two separate issues, really. The corruption of the police department does not have much to do with black people, black on black crime. I think that's a different issue. That there was a lot in that rant that he did, but no, I don't think the police violence directed at the black community can be justified because, well, there are lots of gangs in black communities. I don't think you can justify it that way. I mean, because so often the people who are victimized by the police are not gang members. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? If it was always a gang member being shot, you'd say, well, they're armed, whatever. You think there is some real engagement there, but so many people who are targeted by police are innocent people, or people who have done something minor, that has nothing to do with threatening the life of a police officer. And so I would just say, no, they're not related issues, not really, except insofar as the violence within the black community points to a larger problem in the society, which may feed into a white narrative that's afraid of black people, and also feed into the notion that black people, I think, as Bill was saying, are not, generally speaking, in certain communities, getting the kind of spiritual / educational parental guidance that would perhaps make the communities healthier and safer.
When the Michael Brown shooting happened, there were a psychologist that was on NPR who also talked with lots of white cops who were talking about being afraid of black people. Bill, I see you shaking your head. I'm going to go to you and then to Roger.
No, I just think that's our problem, just what he just said. We turn our heads away from it. If you want to look at some statistics, and the professor or the lawyer down there in North Carolina, open this book up of FBI statistics. Over 320,000 African Americans have killed each other in the last 20 years. I mean, and we just look away from it. It doesn't mean it. It does mean something. Values and lives does mean something. If we don't respect the lives of our own family, our own children, what in the world do you think a white or black policeman is going to think of going in certain neighborhoods where we don't respect it? Just this week in Newport News on Councilwoman Vick's street, 2 young black men are dead. There's nobody marching. There's nobody saying a doggone thing. Oh, let's look at the white police. Sure, that's a problem, and I know that's a problem. But if we don't respect ourselves, we don't respect our own lives, our own very children, and say nothing about it, what in the world? What's wrong with it? We just turn away and say, oh, let's deal with the police. Let's deal with the judges. Why don't we deal with our children that are dying every freaking day on these streets in Hampton Roads?
All right.
Well, I disagree with the point that you say that nobody is dealing with it. I do think that we deal with it a lot of times in smaller ways that don't garner the same attention. And it's a big issue, and I've written about it many times as well. It is linked to the issue where it's not quite the same, but it's linked to the issue where police officers are shooting and killing African Americans. The bigger complaint there is that you have a group of individuals who are paid and trained, and they're supposed to know how to deal with citizens who are not always going to agree with them. And the thing that gets to so many African Americans in this country, I think, is that, in the Michael Brown case, he didn't obey the police officer, but if he did or did not steal the cigarillos, that should not be a killing offense. Eric Garner selling loose cigarettes, that should not be a killing offense. What is it about us that you automatically go from 0 to 60 so fast that you escalate the potential confrontation that we end up dead so much? And I think that is, why so many African Americans are worried about this. And let's be clear on this too. There are so many incidents that never see the light of day because it's not necessarily a bad outcome, but where black and brown people feel like I was treated unfairly there. I didn't really get a fair shake there, and because I kept my cool, I'm not being hauled down to the precinct. But is that really the right thing? And that, I think, brings a lot of the venom and the mistrust.
Okay, Katrina joins us from Newport News. Hi, Katrina. You're on the air.
How are you?
Okay.
I just wanted to bring to, and I'm not sure if you've heard of it or if any of your guests have, but there's a Twitter hashtag that is called Criming While White. And it's really interesting because it basically highlights our Caucasian brothers and sisters committing crimes while the police car drives by. And I just wanted to highlight that because it shows perception. When you're thought of immediately in a negative light, anything you do is cause for an offense or violence. But when you're thought of in a positive light, then nothing that you do is thought of negatively. And so I just wanted to bring that point up, and if anyone had any comments about that, especially when we talk about, don't commit crimes. I hear that so much. Well, black people shouldn't commit crimes. I don't think black people are committing any more crimes in any other ways. I just think they're being targeted more often than any other race.
Okay, Katrina, thank you so much for that call. We appreciate that. Carol, you want to respond?
Yes, I agree, because it's a double-edged sword here. For the black community, yes, there are those of us who are in there doing things that aren't getting attention. There are people who are working in daycare. There are people, community action groups. There are universities. There are civic organizations. But that's not given attention. And maybe because that's not going to be one of those things that is going to sell newspapers or make people galvanized to work together. On the other hand, the whole idea of prejudice is a skin situation. I mean, I hate to say it, but I'm nervous sometimes when I'm walking in certain sections of Norfolk and I'm not doing anything. It's just that I'm black and I'm wondering, okay, maybe I should hurry up and buy this item and get out of the store, even though I'm just browsing, and so
it causes concern.
It causes concern.
Okay, I want to move on to University of Oklahoma because I really want to talk about the major issues, but then get us to solutions. So before we do that, let's take a listen to this. So unless you've been under a rock all week, you know that was the rant, the chanting song that contained the N-word and also referenced lynching. University of Oklahoma SAE fraternity. 2 students, Parker Rice and Levi Pettit, both expelled. Rice is withdrawn from the university and says he's deeply sorry for what he's done. Pettit's parents apologized, saying their sons made a horrible mistake, and apologized to the entire African American community, the University of Oklahoma student body, and administration. The fraternity has been kicked off campus. The house has been shut down. And the news today is that some of the chapter members have hired an attorney to sue the university for closing their chapter. Amos, I know that you went through a similar situation at Emory University back in the late 90s. Is that right?
Absolutely. It was the spring of 2000. It was 15 years ago this month. And what happened there, it was the Kappa Alpha Order fraternity that had first pointed a cannon at the Alpha Phi Alpha house, the black fraternity house, then had displayed for a long time Confederate flag, and then finally had a party and chose to place in our university yearbook a member dressed in blackface in the yearbook. So the third strike, we felt they should be out. And mediation had been attempted for bringing the Confederate flag down, and that was violated. There was a consent decree between a student group of activists that predated my own. and the Kappa Alpha Order. And there it was interesting because the administration chose, and the Atlanta Constitution reported on this, as well as Creative Loafing, an Atlanta tabloid. The administration there decided that they were going to back up the fraternity and they were going to blame the students. But I'm glad that the FBI was brought into this conversation, because we know that these attitudes and shootings and attacks on college students and black communities did not start with black-on-black crime and crack. And we know this because the FBI's own papers that have been published widely in Ward Churchill's book out of University of Colorado, the COINTELPRO papers, and in Betty Metzger's book about the secret FBI that was released last year, and in her reporting in the 70s in the Washington Post, the white lady, we know that the FBI had every black college student at Swarthmore College under surveillance in 1972, and that black students were targeted in particular, of course, who weren't criminals, who weren't killing each other, who weren't doing black-on-black crime, but they were targeted by the FBI in order to forestall any further political progress like what they had done in Selma. So now we know why people are concerned. So read that FBI report, get educated, and we'll now see that we know why there's a target. And at Emory, the administration piled on, and but that school was slapped into a federal Office of Civil Rights, Department of Education compliance order. So they got their face cracked by the federal government, thanks to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that 4 little black girls had to be bombed to death in a Baptist church in Birmingham for America to pass. So that's why people are marching.
So do you think that the president of University of Oklahoma took a different stance
He
compared
was
to
one
Emory?
of the strongest presidents I have ever seen in a swift rebuke that set the tone. People follow the leaders. And that's why in Ferguson there's a push to get rid of the mayor, and why Cheryl and Ifill of the NAACP has said that the whole police department needs to go. If you have, as the Department of Justice found, a systemic discrimination policy in the entire force, then stop paying people $100,000 who are rogue cops to leave and start cleaning house for real. When you have leadership from the top, you won't have a department like that. Most police departments in America are not like Ferguson, I believe. And that's because they have better leadership. President Bourne, who was a Republican senator, that was such a strong and swift and clear answer to this clear moral imperative that I played that whole 6.5-minute clip for my students in the Black American Lawyer class at Campbell Law School on Wednesday.
Okay, Bill, you shaking your head.
That president got up on his feet when I want to give the courage to the Oklahoma football team, who got together and said, change this. And I know he may be a good man. He may be a good, nice, white Republican They changed that when that football player, go back and get that tape and read what he said. He said, we got all our team members together. And he said, you know what he said? This will not stand. And they saw black players not coming to Oklahoma to make them a number 1, number 2 football player, a Big 12 champion team.
It goes back to
those
money
numbers.
Again.
Those are money. They saw the alumni. You know that the quarterback on Texas A&M, I think he raised like $700 million in their endowment. Do you know what kind of money these kids are bringing into these schools? Now, just one more quick comment. This has not changed. In 1971, we were told to get out of Lawrence, Kansas, at University of Kansas, all blacks. You got to go. And we had a riot. And we were monitored by FBI and everybody else. And 2 black folks died there. So nothing has really changed. And it just burns me up. You know, we were all cattered. We were cornered. We were shot at. And 2 died. And so what gets me, the law has really not done anything. Same things are going on. And we were the good kids. We were the ones from the good households. We were the good kids that from the Army officers' sons and daughters and everybody else. The only thing that I learned from that day forward, my dad came up and said, you're not going nowhere. And he gave me his shotgun. And he went home. So all I'm saying that I hear what everybody's saying, but until our community starts facing inward out to get this thing solved, I don't think nothing's going to change.
Okay, if you're just joining us, we're talking about race relations after Selma with our Another View Roundtable. Roger Chesley with the Virginian Pilot, Carol Pretlow with NSU, community activist Bill Thomas, guest pundits Professor, poet, and author Tim Siebels, and Amos Jones, who teaches law at Campbell University Law School. I'm going to give Roger any comments you have on SAE before we start talking about solutions.
I would hate to agree with Bill on that comment that nothing has gotten better. I think a lot has gotten better. Is redlining completely gone? No, but there are a lot more places we can live at. Can we go to practically any university in the country now? Yes, we can. That's why there's so many HBCUs, and we've seen the problems with Sweetbriar now that's going on. So many private colleges are having problems. There are more opportunities. It is not as good as it should be. Where we are as a people, it is not as good as it should be. But I've got to tell you, I think that the life that I was born into, 1959, 1960s, I would like to think that it's vastly better today. The opportunities are vastly better today. And let me just say one other thing. Because of the internet, because of Facebook, because of all these other avenues, we know practically about any slight that goes on nationwide right now. And I would suggest, please take things within context, and please understand, that not everybody across America is going to love us all the time. So it's going to be easy to find miscreants somewhere in the country. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's everything that's going on out in the country.
So let me ask you this then, Carol, and I'll get you to respond to that, and then you, Tim, too. So are you saying then, Roger and others, that because we have the internet and so forth, we're seeing it more, or are we saying that it's always been there, now it's just front and center?
I think it's so easy to put things to the nth degree so quickly now. That doesn't mean that necessarily it wasn't happening before, but I think it does get shoved into our face. And for some folks, there's almost the excuse, well, I got to respond to that, or I've got to put that on blast. I'm not excusing what happened with the SAE. I just want to make that clear. But that doesn't necessarily mean because that's happening there that everybody thinks that way.
Carol, a lot of people say because this is post-racial America after President Obama came into office, it feels like a lot of people say that the racist comments, the things that are happening are much more blatant since President Obama got into office than they were before. What's your perception on that?
I think they might not be more blatant, but they are open to the world to see. And racism that has come as a result or followed Obama's presidency I think that just gave it an impetus to appear. I think it was undercover before, and now it's full circle. The thing that hurt me or baffled me was this academic institution where we have been told that in academia we're certainly above the mundane, and we're a little bit above. And some of us had thought that with the millennials, that here comes a difference. And so when I saw that tape, I was deeply hurt because I'm one of those who said, oh, the millennials are having a different experience. When I talk to students at Norfolk State and some at ODU and all over the area, I'm seeing a different attitude, a different perspective. Then I see these students who are singing this racist rant, and I'm like, what happened? Where did they come from? And how did it happen?
Tim, you're on the college campus too.
Sure. Well, I'm at ODU, but as my man was saying, I do think because of the technology, the media technology now, I mean, everything seems like monstrous, whereas surely I have absolute faith that things are somewhat different now. I mean, there are white people who certainly have more progressive ideas about race than they might have 50 years ago. And you still have people who hold on to old Confederate flag kind of romance and all kinds of things. You have them.
To be fair, too, we need to also look at ourselves because it's not just white people feeling differently about us, but black folks have some thoughts also.
Sure. Well, as I was saying, I just think that certainly things are changing, but history is long, and it's not like, I mean, our lifetime is 80 years if we're lucky. Yeah. And of course, things seem to be moving very slowly, and certainly too slow for any of us who aren't going to be here to see the promised land, right? But I do think there's a shift. I mean, I'm teaching the Harlem Renaissance right now, and half my class is white and half is black. Now, certainly any white student who would take such a class is going to be leaning, I think, generally toward a more progressive perspective, but not always.
Just a quick point.
And the discussion, though, the discussions we've had about race and representation and so on just reflect some real sophistication on the part of the white students and the black students about the history of race, what it means, how it enacts itself in present culture. So I certainly still have a lot of hope for the future. It's just that I'm just not under the impression that overnight, we're going to see the police holding hands with the black community. I just think with pressure, like we see with these protests and talk shows like this and so on, that bit by bit, there will have to be a different kind of policing in the
just my quick point. Just my quick point to counter Roger. When I first went to kindergarten, 5 years old, I could not go with my white friends. I had to go to a different school because I was black. When I went to the University of Kansas, I couldn't get a good education. I got a good education, but I couldn't do it peacefully, not because of my character, but because I was black. And today, Roger, unfortunately, when you saw those kids saying that and the den mother or the house mother saying the same thing, I'm sitting on, I'm walking down the street with you and somebody on top of the Empire State Building look down at us. Those are not two Americans. Those are two ends. And, that has not changed. And I don't know how we're going to get it done, and it's still the same.
Well, speaking of that, let's talk about solutions then, because we do want to go segue into what can we do to make it better. Let's talk to Morgan from Newport News. Hi, Morgan. You're on the air.
Hey, Barbara. My name is Morgan Moss, and I'm the co-director of the Center for Therapeutic Justice. And we've spent the last 20 years trying to change the culture of incarceration because all of these racial disparities and the things you're describing on the front end of the criminal justice system end up creating a culture and an environment inside correctional institutions that damages everybody. And when I heard President Obama's speech in Selma, and, I don't know how many people actually heard and listened to every word of that. It was very powerful. One of the commentators said, is this going to be like Martin Luther King's dream speech? And one said yes, and the second one said, yeah, but look at what Dr. King's speech brought about. What will this bring about? And so I'm wondering when the public will is going to change such that people look at correctional facilities and the traumatic, damaging culture in there. I had one judge tell me several years ago, I want people coming out better, not bitter. In one of the cities, and not one of the Hampton Roads cities either, here in Virginia, back about 5 or 6 years ago, an inmate wrote and said, I'm incarcerated on a slave ship. I've heard, one young man said, listen, we're a cash crop. The guy who ran the San Francisco jails years ago was on 60 Minutes a long time ago, and he said, this is a monster factory. When are we going to have the public will and become so frustrated that this is going on and we're putting folks in there and they're coming out worse and worse? We can change that culture.
Okay. Let's let our panel respond to it then, because we got a lot of calls and I want to make sure we get in as many as possible. Amos, I'm going to let you take that one and respond to what the gentleman
that solution is important because it looks at the front end and the back end of the problems. It also examines a particular system, what might be called the prison industrial complex. But let's not forget again that much of this turns on economic peril. And even though there may be an attitudinal improvement in where we are today, and by the way, the studies that talk about millennials being being more tolerant, you have to look beneath the surface in those Pew surveys and look at the national election studies and find that actually there's not a big change between them on some things and baby boomers and Generation X. But what we have to understand is that we have an economic problem that's made worse by the fact that now that blacks have access to higher education, it just costs 20 times more than it did 30 years ago. And for a community that was systematically shut out of wealth, because even black wealthy doctors could not live in the best housing, and therefore their wealth and transfers were limited, it's almost like the fix is in. So it's very difficult to move out of one's situation in a capitalistic society, as I think it should be, but where we've had these accelerations of costs and no real tangible compensation for blacks who have had to pay the price for America's dice from 1619 to 2015. That has to be corrected.
Okay, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. We're talking about what can we do on an individual basis, on a group basis, whatever way to start to turn this ship around to make race relations better in America. Roger, I think I asked each of our panelists to come in with an idea. So Roger, let's start with you.
Yeah, and we talked briefly about this. I think something that's valuable is to be the minority in a situation. And when you are the minority, you have to confront people who think a lot differently than you and who see the world a lot differently from you. And if you at least get into a situation where there's some interaction, there's some discussion, you can empathize more with their situation, and you can see the world maybe in a way that you didn't before. Now, how do you do this? Maybe you do this in forums, maybe you do this in different settings where you go to. My wife and I like to kid sometimes when we go out of town and we stop somewhere in a restaurant. Boy, we really integrated that place today, but now it's segregated again because there's nobody black left in there now that we've left. But if you get into the situations where you're not always the person that's in charge, I think you see things in a different way. And any time that you deal with people, you have to deal with them not as a myth, not as a stereotype, but as an individual. And then when you can do that, then you learn a little bit something more about them and more about yourself.
Actually, the YWCA of Southampton Road has something called Mix It Up. It's a luncheon where we just invite people in, and the only criteria is that you sit and talk with someone who does not look like you. And the whole idea being to bring people together, as you were talking. Carol, what's your idea?
Well, I agree too, and I think that one of my ideas is less formal than that. I go to Barnes & Noble a lot, and I'm giving a plug to them, but I sit there and I get to talk to kids from ODU, from Norfolk State, and people with little children. And I think by just hearing and being just an average person sitting there talking informally, I get hopefully to make a difference and hear some of the problems that cannot be addressed through a more formal structure.
Okay.
So,
Bill?
My friend.
I need your mic.
I took some medicine because it's a rough day today. But anyhow, I went to agree with my friend from North Carolina. I think it has to be changed through the law. And what we're doing, listening to the gentleman talk about the prisons, you have to make changes in the law. We're doing two things. Number one, we're trying to get the Commonwealth to accept charter schools, educational options for African Americans. And that particular bill finally passed this year after 15 years of fighting for it. It goes back to the General Assembly next year, then it'll go up to the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia to have that choice come about. The other thing is just to mentor the kids. We try to do about 10 or 15 a year. We started a program with the two schools, one in North Carolina and one in Hampton, where two of our graduates are first-year school teachers. And we're funding them, and we have a funding mechanism on our website that nobody's answering, but we're still doing very, very well of providing opportunities and mentorship for kids that are going to these public schools. It's just got to be a hands-on-hand thing, and you got to change the law where it's effective. And then lastly, what we have to do, we're going to have to get people elected that are going to fight for us and do the kind of things that we need to do to get these laws changed. Otherwise, gentleman down in North Carolina, we don't get these laws changed, it's not ever going to change.
Amos Jones is his
and
name.
that's why I have at least 5 active race discrimination lawsuits across the federal courts of the country, not only to get the laws changed, but to make sure the laws on the books are enforced. On Wednesday in Pittsburgh, in a case under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the federal court there, the federal judge invalidated a portion of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in a case against Art Institute of Pittsburgh. He says that when you activate your right to sue at the EEOC, the company can come in after that and make you go to arbitration. And it's one of the most ludicrous opinions you'll ever read, but that's what we're up against. So those of us who file suit and actually activate these protections that we've had for 50 years also make sure that people get remedies, which is the compensation benefit that I talked about. That's a real solution. And when the law is not right, we have to get to a higher court. Black people are always having to go on appeal and pay all that money, because at the district court levels, it's one judge, usually white, frequently insensitive. And we always have to pay the extra money to go on appeal because that is where there's more accountability. And that's my second solution. Panels of judges instead of singular judges. It is much harder for an appellate tribunal because of 3 judges or a jury with several people together to work an injustice the way one person operating in secrecy and obscurity, because cameras don't roll in federal court, to do. So we need to do that. We need to have a real reform where there's a greater opportunity to have diverse judges because of more judges and an increasingly diversifying federal bench, thanks to President Clinton, President Obama, and even President Bush.
Okay.
That's a real, tangible reform.
All right, and go ahead. No,
I was just going to say incrementally, in defense of the millennials, I mean, you can see, for example, something that Roger was talking about is people get to know each other and how it changes some of the dynamics in the culture. When you think about the protests that we saw with regard to Eric Garner in New York, and after the Trayvon Martin verdict came down, most of those protests were multiracial, multicultural. And I remember in the 70s and earlier, if something was wrong with and happened to someone black people protested, and white people looked and said, gee, I wonder what's wrong with them. And so what I'm seeing more of, and this is not to say there are plenty of racist and small-hearted, superficial people, but I do think there is a trend toward a wider lens on what a healthy human community looks like. And so I think a number of my young white students and black students begin to see each other as part of a larger nation that either will work together all together or it will not work at all, which is a different mentality. And I still think it's still in an early stage, but I do believe it is growing. And if you just look around at the protests, very rarely do you see just only black folks protesting a particular issue.
Okay. Let's go to Andrew in Virginia Beach. Hi, Andrew. You have a solution for us?
Yes, I think so. One of the things that happens, and I think the last speaker just kind of alluded to it, we do tend to melt in together, and we go to protests and things like that. But that animal, that R word out there, that racism word, I will bet you if you ask 10 people in a row, you won't get a solid definition of what racism is because they don't know. And I think one of the things that happens is we don't discuss it. We take and stick it under the rug. We back off of it. We don't want to talk about it. But we have to examine what that is, because that thing is what causes people to be able to stand on one side of the street and look at somebody that may be even above them sociologically and put that person down under them because they're different, different color. That attitude of me being better than you, even those folks that would claim that they are liberal, even those folks that are in that protest, they don't understand what it is, what that element is that causes them in some situations to have that fear jump up because that person looks different from them. So I think the issue is, do we as a country, as a group of people across all those lines, do we really understand how this country came to be with this R word, racism, this thing of privilege based on economic and issues before, but it's all about privilege now.
Okay.
And we have to understand where we fit. If we educate people to that and you understand the definition of racism, most people use it as a substitute for prejudice or discrimination or bigotry. Those aren't racism. Racism includes those, but you got to understand that thing about power to perpetuate it in the minds and in the fabric of society.
Okay, Andrew, thank you so much. We got to run on because I want to try to get 2 more calls in before we're out of time. This hour has flown by. Let's see. Desmond joins us from Yorktown. Hi, Desmond. You're on the air.
Hi. How are you guys today?
Okay. You got about a minute.
I got a few things I want to talk about. First,
well, very quickly, within a minute.
Okay. The first thing is family. We have lacked the ability to maintain our families. Those things create discipline problems and a whole host of other problems.
Okay.
We have a serious graduation problem with our predominantly our young men. That's a problem. And we need to, once we get education, we need to seek out fields and degree programs that are needed in the marketplace. Last year, President Obama and the tech industry allowed 250,000 H-1B visas for people from India and other countries to come into this country to get a job. That is the problem for us who don't have jobs. That's the problem.
Okay.
That could be a solution to some of our problems.
Okay. Thank you so much, Desmond. We appreciate that. All right. We've got less than, I think, about 3 minutes. So, Amos, I'm going to start with you to just say one last thing you'd like people to think about as we try to come together.
I would like people to think about the fact that usually our best days are ahead, and the agreement here is beautiful because it's, I think, transracial, and the future is in community building. It's in more integration, more intentionality in our personal relationships. Unfortunately, the burden of proof will be on black people because we are the marginalized minority, and that's just the way it is, and we have to find all of these creative ways to make the world a better place.
Okay.
We've done it in the past, and we'll keep doing it in the future.
Thank you so much. That's Amos Jones, who teaches law at Campbell University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Tim,
well,
30 seconds.
As I said, I would only say, follow up what I said earlier. The idea is that, human beings, I think, are inclined towards sanity, generally speaking. And a healthy society, means a society in which all people feel like they're full citizens. Many whites, blacks, browns, etc., understand that unless everyone feels like they have a viable opportunity to live and thrive in this culture, the whole culture will be sick.
Okay. Tim Siebels, author, poet, and we appreciate you being here, and professor. Bill.
Yeah, I see it as us cooperating together. Back in the 70s when we were struggling with these problems, there were more white folks and Jews marching in line with us. Mm-hmm. They got on the buses. They stood in line with it. They supported me. I see a bright future in these younger kids, and we got to stop separating us from white. We got to come one. We got to raise our families, and we got to work together. So I see that as a new way of working forward. Just reach out. There's no differences. Let's try to figure out how to make them work together.
Our community activist, Bill Thomas. Thank you. Carol.
Well, I don't think I could say anything that the other two gentlemen haven't already said. Let's stick together. Let's keep on forging and not lose hope.
Let's not lose hope. Roger?
I think a lot of times we see the things the way they are now, and we say there's so many problems. But if you objectively look at where we are today as opposed to 50 years ago, I would like to think that we have progressed. It doesn't mean everything that's great. It doesn't mean that we still don't have problems. I think we can make progress. Let's not give up hope.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And with that, that's Roger Chesley with the Virginian Pilot, and we'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation, and you're listening to Another View on WHRV 89.5 FM.
And that's it for this edition of Another View. Hey, go to our website, anotherviewradio.org, and click on events to find out about the portrayal of Tuskegee Airman Benjamin O. Davis by historian John W. McCaskill. It's tomorrow at 2 at the Fort Monroe Theater. And on Sunday, 3 historic Portsmouth African-American churches come together for the first time in 150 years. All the details can be found at anotherviewradio.org/events. Next week, relationship expert and educator Alvian Lyons joins us as we continue to explore new ways to improve our children's experiences in school. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer. And who answered our phones today, Lisa? Chantel Davis answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. And let's get together again next Friday at noon for another view.